January 15th, 1943, 70 miles northwest of Rabaul, New Britain. Commander Howard Gilmore stood on the bridge of USS Growler, scanning the dark Pacific waters through his binoculars. 5 days into their fourth war patrol, his submarine had finally found what it was hunting, a Japanese convoy, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. 2 patrol boats flanking a cargo ship heavy with supplies bound for the most powerful Japanese base in the South Pacific. Gilmore had studied the intelligence reports in Brisbane before departure. Rabaul was bleeding Japan dry. Every week, convoys departed Truk carrying ammunition, fuel, food, and reinforcements for the 110,000 Japanese troops fortifying Simpson Harbor. And every week, American submarines prowled the shipping lanes, waiting. Gilmore maneuvered Growler inside the convoy escorts. 2 torpedoes leaped from the tubes. 60 seconds later, the Chifuku Maru, a 6,000-ton passenger and cargo vessel, erupted in flames. As the ship listed and began its descent, Japanese patrol boats turned toward the source of the attack. Depth charges followed, forcing Growler deep, but one ship had been removed from Rabaul's lifeline, one ship among hundreds that would never reach their destination. This is the documented story of how American submarines conducted a campaign of strategic strangulation against Japan's fortress at Rabaul, based on declassified patrol reports, Japanese records recovered after the war, and the verified accounts of submariners who hunted in the most dangerous waters of the Pacific. Rabaul was not supposed to become Japan's most important South Pacific base. It became one by necessity and geography. Located on the northeastern tip of New Britain, Rabaul possessed Simpson Harbor, a natural anchorage 8 miles long and 6 miles wide, ringed by volcanic mountains. British explorer Philip Carteret had mapped it in 1767, Royal Navy surveyor. Cortland Simpson rediscovered it in 1872, giving his name to the harbour. Geologically, Rabaul sat in a sunken caldera. The mother, Mount Convoy, rose 2,247 feet on Crater Peninsula, flanked by the north and south daughters. Small earthquakes were common, sometimes coming in swarms of thousands in a single month. Despite the seismic activity, the harbour's strategic value was undeniable. When Japanese forces invaded on January 23, 1942, they overwhelmed the small Australian garrison in a matter of hours. Lark Force, numbering approximately 1,400 men under Lieutenant Colonel John Scanlon, was no match for the Japanese task force that arrived from Truk. 4 aircraft carriers, Kaga, Akagi, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, supported by 7 cruisers and 14 destroyers under Vice Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue, delivered over 5,000 Japanese troops to Rabaul's shores. The Australian RAAF commander, Wing, Commander John Leroux, sent one final signal to Melbourne headquarters before the Japanese assault. Nos morituri te salutamus. We who are about to die salute you. The phrase uttered by Roman gladiators before entering the arena. Of the over 1,000 Australian soldiers captured, approximately 160 were massacred at Toll and Waitavalo plantations in the days following surrender. What Japan gained was strategic positioning that would dominate the South Pacific for the next 2 years. What Japan could not anticipate was the supply cost of maintaining such a garrison. By early 1943, Rabaul had been transformed into the Pearl Harbor of the South Pacific. 5 airfields surrounded the harbor. Lakunai and Vunakanau were pre-war Australian strips now expanded with Japanese engineering. Rapopo, 14 miles southeast, became operational in December 1942 with concrete runways and extensive maintenance facilities. Tobera, completed in August 1943, sat halfway between Vunakanau and Rapopo. A 5th airfield, Borpop, was built across St. George's Channel on New Ireland. The 4 main airfields featured 166 protected revetments for bombers and 265 for fighters, with additional dispersal areas. Anti-aircraft defences consisted of 367 guns coordinated between Army and naval units. Naval batteries guarded Simpson Harbor and 3 airfields. Army units defended Rabaul, supply dumps, and installations. An effective early warning radar system provided coverage extending 90 miles from Rabaul, with additional installations on New Britain, New Ireland, and Buka. By mid-1943, approximately 110,000 Japanese troops were garrisoned at Rabaul. This concentration of force required a logistical miracle. Japanese planners calculated the tonnage requirements: food for 110,000 men, aviation fuel for hundreds of aircraft, ammunition for the guns, spare parts for ships and planes, medical supplies, construction materials. The supply line stretched 1,800 miles from Truk in the Caroline Islands. Every cargo ship that failed to reach Rabaul meant hungry troops, grounded aircraft, or silent guns. This vulnerability was not lost on American submarine commanders. The United States Navy had established 3 major submarine bases for the Pacific War. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, served the Central Pacific. Dutch Harbor, Alaska, covered the North Pacific. Brisbane, Australia, became the hub for Southwest Pacific operations, specifically targeting the shipping lanes between Japan's major bases and the front lines. Commander, Submarine Forces, Southwest Pacific operated from Brisbane with a clear mission: strangle Japanese supply lines. The waters around Rabaul represented the highest value target area in their operational zones. Japanese convoys departing Truk for Rabaul, convoys moving between Rabaul and New Guinea, convoys resupplying forward positions, all had to transit through patrol zones assigned to American submarines. USS Growler was one of dozens of fleet submarines assigned to these deadly waters in 1943. Under Commander Howard Gilmore, Growler departed Brisbane on January 1, 1943, assigned to patrol shipping lanes between Truk and Rabaul. This area bristled with Japanese aircraft and naval patrols. The Japanese were recoiling from the loss of Guadalcanal and desperate to reinforce their positions. Soldiers and materials flowed through Rabaul to support operations across the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. Gilmore was 39 years old, a career submarine officer who had commanded Growler since her commissioning in March 1942. His crew had completed 3 war patrols. They understood the rhythm of submarine warfare. Weeks of monotonous searching, punctuated by minutes of Toprosa's violent action, followed by hours of evasion while depth charges exploded overhead. On January 15th, after 5 days in the patrol area, Growler achieved her first success. Manning inside the convoy escorts, Gilmore fired torpedoes that struck a Japanese cargo ship. The Chifuku Maru, carrying supplies to Rabaul, went down. Growler was spotted and forced deep to evade the inevitable counterattack. Depth charges bracketed the submarine, but Growler's hull held. She slipped away to hunt again. 8 days later, on January 23rd, Growler sank the Miodono Maru, another 6,000-ton passenger cargo vessel bound for Rabaul. 2 ships in 8 days. 2 cargoes that would never reinforce the Japanese garrison. Gilmore shifted his patrol area west, moving to intercept traffic between Truk and Palau in the Caroline Islands. The pattern repeated across multiple submarines operating in adjacent patrol zones. USS Greenling damaged the Army cargo ship Shinai Maru north of Rabaul on January 20th. USS Swordfish encountered a Japanese reinforcement convoy and sank the Army cargo ship Miyoho Maru on the same day. USS Gato damaged the Army transport Kenkon Maru just east of Kieta Bougainville on January 23rd. Escorts scuttled the crippled ship to hasten her sinking. Each submarine operated independently, assigned specific patrol zones to prevent friendly fire incidents. Yet together they formed a gauntlet through which Japanese shipping had to pass. The mathematics were brutal. For every cargo ship that reached Rabaul, another was torpedoed, damaged, or sunk. Japan's logistics chiefs watched their carefully calculated supply schedules dissolve into chaos. The submarines faced significant dangers. Japanese convoys traveled with destroyer escorts equipped with depth charges. Japanese aircraft patrolled the approaches to Rabaul, forcing submarines to remain submerged during daylight hours. Submerged operations limited a submarine's speed to about 8 knots, making it difficult to intercept fast-moving convoys. Surface operations at night offered speed, but exposed the submarine to visual detection. Weather conditions complicated operations. Persistent rain reduced visibility, making it difficult to spot convoys. Heavy seas made accurate torpedo firing problematic. Submarines had to close to within a few thousand yards of their targets, putting themselves within easy reach of escort counterattacks. The technical challenges were equally daunting. American torpedoes in early 1943 still suffered from reliability problems. Magnetic exploders detonated prematurely, or failed to detonate at all. Depth-keeping mechanisms sometimes caused torpedoes to run too deep, passing harmlessly beneath targets. Contact exploders occasionally failed on direct hits. Submarine commanders learned to fire multiple torpedoes at each target, compensating for expected failures. Despite these challenges, the submarines pressed their attacks. The strategic importance of interdicting Rabaul's supply line justified the risks. Every ton of supplies that didn't reach Rabaul weakened Japan's defensive position. Every troop transport sunk meant fewer soldiers to oppose Allied advances. Every tanker torpedoed meant fewer sorties by Japanese aircraft. USS Triton departed Brisbane on February 16, 1943, assigned to patrol the sea lanes between Rabaul and Shortland Basin. Under Lieutenant Commander George Mackenzie Jr., Triton quickly found herself in the thick of enemy activity. On March 6, she attacked a Japanese convoy, reporting the sinking of 2 ships and damage to a third. But success came with risk. One of her torpedoes made a circular run, forcing Triton to dive deep to avoid her own weapon. The next few days saw relentless hunting. Triton made multiple attacks on enemy convoys, some successful, others repelled by defensive escorts. Her last message came on March 11th, 2 groups of smokes, 5 or more ships each, plus escorts. Am chasing. She was never heard from again. On March 13th, Triton was warned of 3 enemy destroyers sighted in her vicinity, possibly on a submarine hunt. What followed on March 15th remains documented in Japanese records. 3 destroyers engaged and depth-charged a submarine at approximately 0 degrees 9 minutes north, 144 degrees 55 minutes east, north of the Admiralty Islands. The attack was prolonged and vicious. Japanese accounts state that a significant oil slick, pieces of wood, cork, and debris marked the location, including manufactured goods with American markings. USS Trigger, operating in an adjoining patrol area, heard the depth charge attack lasting more than an hour. On April 10, 1943, the Navy declared Triton overdue and presumed lost with all 74 men aboard. Triton had sunk 9 ships during her 5 completed war patrols, totaling approximately 40,000 tons. She was the first American submarine to engage the enemy after Pearl Harbor, operating off Wake Island in December 1941. Now she joined the growing list of submarines that would not return from patrols around Rabaul. The waters around Rabaul consumed submarines with terrifying regularity. USS Argonaut was lost on January 10, 1943, with 102 officers and men. While attacking a convoy off Rabaul, she torpedoed a Japanese destroyer. That destroyer, along with 2 others, depth-charged Argonaut. As she attempted to surface, the destroyers sank her with gunfire. It was her 3rd war patrol. USS Amberjack was lost on February 16, 1943, with 72 officers and men on her 3rd war patrol. Off Rabaul, she was attacked by a Japanese patrol plane, then by a torpedo boat, and finally depth-charged by a subchaser. The combined assault was fatal. These losses highlighted the brutal arithmetic of submarine warfare around Rabaul. American submarines inflicted devastating losses on Japanese shipping, but the Japanese defenders learned to protect their convoys. Escort vessels became more proficient at anti-submarine tactics. Air patrols increased. The waters around Rabaul became a killing ground for both sides. Yet the submarines continued to arrive. USS Gudgeon completed her 5th war patrol in October through December 1942, operating from the Southwest Pacific submarine base. On October 21st, she sank the 6,783-ton Choco Maru west-northwest of Rabaul. On November 11th, she carried out a daring attack on a 7-ship convoy, torpedoing several ships, though sinking none. The pattern was set. Individual submarines rotated through patrol zones around Rabaul on 60 to 90-day cycles. They would depart Brisbane, transit to their assigned patrol area, spend 3 to 4 weeks hunting, then return to Brisbane for resupply, repairs, and crew rest. Some patrols produced multiple sinkings. Others resulted in no contacts. A few submarines never returned. The cumulative effect created strategic pressure on Japanese operations. Rabaul's garrison commander, Lieutenant General Hitoshi Imamura, watched his supply situation deteriorate throughout 1943. Cargo ships departed Truk but never arrived. Troop transports set sail but reached Rabaul with decimated complements. Tankers carrying aviation fuel exploded at sea. The mathematics of attrition worked against Japan. By spring of 1943, Japanese military planners recognized they could no longer sustain large-scale convoy operations to Rabaul. The losses were unsustainable. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea in early March 1943 demonstrated the futility of sending large convoys through waters dominated by Allied air power and submarines. On February 28, 1943, a Japanese convoy departed Simpson Harbor bound for Lae, New Guinea. The convoy comprised 8 destroyers and 8 troop transports carrying approximately 6,900 troops from the 51st Division. The convoy was detected by Allied reconnaissance. Naval codebreakers in Melbourne and Washington had decrypted messages indicating the convoy's destination and date of arrival. Allied air forces had developed new tactics, including skip bombing, to improve their chances of successful air attacks on ships. Between March 2nd and 4th, Allied aircraft from the U.S. 5th Air Force and Royal Australian Air Force conducted sustained attacks. All 8 transports and 4 of the 8 escorting destroyers were sunk. Of 6,900 troops desperately needed in New Guinea, only about 1,200 made it to Lae. Another 2,700 were rescued by destroyers and submarines and returned to Rabaul. While this devastating action primarily involved aircraft rather than submarines, it reinforced the lesson that Rabaul's supply lines were vulnerable to interdiction. Japanese commanders at Rabaul estimated that approximately 20,000 troops were lost during sea transit in the Rabaul New Guinea area over the course of the war. Submarines contributed significantly to this toll. After the Bismarck Sea disaster, Japanese supply operations to New Guinea became what they termed a scrabbler's run of barges, small craft, and submarines. Large convoy operations were deemed too risky. The Japanese had to send convoys much farther up the coast, out of air attack range, causing immense difficulties in getting supplies to the front. Troops sent forth were hardly safe, even in smaller vessels. American submarines hunted these targets as aggressively as they had hunted large convoys. The strategic impact extended beyond simple tonnage calculations. Every Japanese planner had to account for expected losses when calculating supply requirements. If Rabaul needed 1,000 tons of ammunition per month, planners had to ship 1,500 tons, expecting 1/3 to be lost in transit. This inefficiency multiplied across every supply category, straining Japan's already limited merchant fleet. The submarine campaign forced Japan to divert destroyers from offensive operations to convoy escort duty. Destroyers designed for fleet actions found themselves shepherding slow cargo ships through submarine-infested waters. This defensive posture reduced Japan's offensive capabilities and tied down valuable warships in escort roles. Intelligence played a crucial role in submarine effectiveness. Naval codebreakers in Melbourne, operating as Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne, known as FRUMEL, and their counterparts in Washington, regularly decrypted Japanese naval communications. These decrypts revealed convoy departure times, routes, and destinations. Submarine commanders received this intelligence, allowing them to position their boats along convoy routes for optimal intercept positions. The intelligence advantage was not total. Japanese communications security improved over time. Some messages could not be decrypted in time to be tactically useful. Weather and mechanical problems sometimes prevented submarines from reaching planned intercept positions. But the cumulative advantage of knowing when and where Japanese convoys would appear gave American submarines a crucial edge. USS Growler's patrol in January and February 1943 demonstrated both the potential and the peril of submarine operations around Rabaul. After sinking the Chifuku Maru and Miyadono Maru in mid-January, Growler continued hunting. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The submarine moved through various approach routes to Rabaul, searching for targets. Persistent rain made spotting enemy ships difficult. Several days passed with no viable contacts. On the night of January 26th, Growler spotted 2 patrol boats escorting a merchant ship. Commander Gilmore attempted to establish a firing solution while submerged, but the convoy's course and speed made tracking difficult. To establish a better firing position, Gilmore ordered Growler to surface and run at full speed to overtake the convoy and get ahead of it for a shot. This decision reflected the tactical reality of submarine warfare. Submerged, a submarine could make 8 to 9 knots. Most cargo ships travelled at 10 to 12 knots. Destroyers and patrol boats could exceed 20 knots. To catch a convoy, submarines often had to surface and use their diesel engines, which could drive them at 20 knots or more. But surface operations exposed the submarine to visual detection and gunfire. The convoy slipped away before Growler could attack. The Japanese, aware of an American submarine in the area, began actively searching. Growler moved to a new area where Japanese forces were not actively hunting. For several days, no viable targets materialized. Gilmore repositioned Growler, moving up and down New Island, inspecting straits between nearby islands. Very few targets appeared, and persistent rain continued to hamper visual detection. On the night of February 4th, Growler spotted a Japanese convoy of merchant ships with 2 patrol boats escorting. Weather conditions and resulting poor visibility led Gilmore to opt for a surface attack. This decision would have fatal consequences, but not in the way Gilmore expected. The night was black, no moon. Commander Gilmore ordered Growler to close on the convoy at full surface speed. The submarine's diesel engines thrummed as she knifed through the dark Pacific, maneuvering to get inside the escort screen for a point-blank shot. At approximately 2100 hours, lookouts spotted something ahead, not the convoy, something closer. A Japanese gunboat, patrol vessel Hayasaki, emerged from the darkness on a collision course. Both vessels spotted each other simultaneously at a prize, a range of less than 300 yards. Gilmore ordered hard left rudder, attempting to evade. The Japanese skipper ordered hard right. The physics of momentum at sea are unforgiving. Neither vessel could turn fast enough. Growler's bow struck Hayasaki amidships at 17 knots, the impact crushing steel and throwing men from both vessels into the water. Japanese machine gun fire raked Growler's bridge immediately. Commander Gilmore was struck. The officer of the deck was hit. The quartermaster fell. The Japanese gunners poured fire into the conning tower at point-blank range. Gilmore, wounded and unable to climb down the bridge hatch, gave his final order: take her down. Lieutenant Commander Arnold Shade, the executive officer inside the submarine, heard the command through the voice tube. For 3 seconds, he hesitated. Taking the submarine down meant leaving the bridge crew in the water. Staying on the surface meant losing the entire boat to Japanese gunfire or depth, charges from approaching escorts. Shade gave the order. Growler's ballast tanks flooded. The submarine nosed down, slipping beneath the dark water. Commander Howard Gilmore remained on the bridge with 2 other crew members as the Pacific closed over them. It was February 7th, 1943. Gilmore's final words, "Take her down," would become legendary in submarine service lore. Growler survived. Sade, now in command, nursed the damaged submarine back to Brisbane. The collision had crushed Growler's bow, bending frames and rupturing the forward torpedo room. That Sade managed to bring her home at all was considered remarkable seamanship. Commander Gilmore received the Medal of Honor posthumously. He was the first submariner to receive the nation's highest decoration during World War II, and only the second in submarine service history. The incident illustrated the razor-thin margin between success and disaster in submarine warfare around Rabaul. Aggressive tactics produced results but exacted costs. American submarines could not afford to be cautious. The mission demanded pressing attacks despite danger. Yet every aggressive approach risked collision, gunfire, or depth charge counterattack. By mid-1943, the cumulative impact of submarine operations around Rabaul was becoming clear in Japanese supply records. Shipping losses in the Southwest Pacific exceeded 70,000 gross tons per month, far above the level Japanese naval strategists had predicted in their pre-war calculations. In August 1943, Japanese officers noted a sudden jump in sinking rates. American submarines had received improved torpedoes with magnetic exploders that actually worked, and crews had developed better attack techniques through brutal experience. The shipping situation deteriorated so severely that in late August 1943, Japanese military leadership began doubting their ability to hold Rabaul. The Army, always more willing than the Navy to contract the defensive perimeter, proposed pulling back the first line of defense to positions linking the Marianas, the Carolines, and Western New Guinea. After heated discussions between Army and Navy staff, the decision was made to hold Rabaul but acknowledge that Japan could no longer sustain large-scale supply operations. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, Navy Vice Chief of Staff, initially resisted contracting the defense line. Over 90% of naval defense materials had been committed to Rabaul. Abandoning the base meant abandoning enormous investments, but Lieutenant General Hikosaburo Hata, Army Vice Chief of Staff, countered that shipping losses made sustaining Rabaul impossible. The Navy reluctantly agreed. The submarine threat had accomplished what air power and surface forces alone could not. It made Rabaul strategically untenable. Even if the base could defend itself against direct assault, it could not be adequately supplied. An unsupplied garrison, no matter how large, becomes irrelevant to military operations. Japanese merchant tonnage as of September 1st, 1943 was broken down into Army control at 1,179,400 gross tons, Navy control at 1,687,900 gross tons, and civil control at 2,692,500 gross tons. Total available tonnage was just over 5.5 million gross tons. Pre-war Japanese planners had calculated they needed 10 million gross tons to sustain wartime operations. The gap between requirement and availability was killing Japan's ability to wage war. American submarines were not the only cause of Japanese shipping losses. Allied aircraft sank numerous vessels. Surface actions destroyed others, but submarine attacks accounted for the largest share of merchant vessel sinkings. United States submarines sank 4,779,902 tons of Japanese merchant shipping during the course of the war, accounting for 54.6% of all Japanese vessel losses. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The human cost of the submarine campaign extended beyond military casualties. Japanese cargo ships routinely carried prisoners of war and civilian internees. American submarine commanders had no way of knowing which ships carried POWs. Intelligence occasionally identified specific transports carrying prisoners, but most attacks occurred without knowledge of who was aboard target vessels. On July 1, 1942, USS Sturgeon torpedoed and sank the Montevideo Maru off the north coast of Luzon. The transport was carrying approximately 800 Australian soldiers and 200 civilian prisoners of war from Rabaul to Japan. All 1,000 perished. It was the worst maritime disaster in Australian history. The submarine's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander William Wright, had no knowledge that POWs were aboard. The Montevideo Maru was a legitimate military target carrying troops and supplies. This tragedy repeated throughout the Pacific War. In 1942, Allied submarine attacks killed 1,903 POWs, actually outnumbering Japanese military personnel killed by submarines that year. By 1943, as submarine effectiveness improved, the ratio shifted dramatically toward military casualties, but POW deaths continued. The moral complexity of unrestricted submarine warfare was inescapable. For the submariners themselves, each patrol around Rabaul was an exercise in sustained tension, weeks of monotonous searching broken by minutes of violent action. The interior of a fleet submarine on patrol was cramped, hot, and reeked of diesel fuel, unwashed men, and cooking odours that permeated every surface. Air quality deteriorated during extended submerged operations as carbon dioxide levels rose. Crews operated on 18-hour watches, trying to sleep in bunks stacked 3 high with less than 2 feet of clearance. The psychological strain was constant. Any moment might bring the lookout's call of a convoy sighting, requiring the crew to man battle stations. Any moment might bring the sound of Japanese aircraft engines overhead, forcing an emergency dive. Any moment might bring the terror of depth charges exploding close enough to knock men off their feet and rupture equipment. Submarine losses were absolute. When a submarine was sunk, the entire crew died. There were no survivors from depths of several hundred feet, yet the submariners continued their patrols. They understood the strategic importance of their mission. Every Japanese cargo ship sunk weakened the enemy's ability to sustain operations. Every troop transport torpedoed meant fewer soldiers opposing Allied advances. The mathematics of attrition favoured the side with more submarines, more torpedoes, and better intelligence. That side was the United States. By late 1943, Rabaul's strategic situation had become untenable. Allied forces had captured Bougainville, bringing Rabaul within range of land-based tactical bombers. The decision was made to neutralize Rabaul through air power rather than direct assault. Submarine operations continued, interdicting the reduced supply shipments that still attempted to reach the fortress. But the campaign's objective had shifted from strangling Rabaul's garrison to preventing any supplies from reaching it at all. The submarine war around Rabaul represented strategic naval warfare at its most effective. American submarines, operating independently but coordinating through intelligence and patrol zone assignments, created conditions that made holding Rabaul impossible for Japan. The tonnage sunk, the troops lost at sea, the supplies never delivered. These accumulated into strategic effect far exceeding the submarine's modest numbers. The final accounting of the submarine campaign around Rabaul reveals numbers that tell only part of the story. Throughout 1943, American submarines mounted approximately 350 war patrols across the Pacific, sinking about 335 Japanese merchant ships, totaling approximately 1.5 million tons. These numbers were nearly double the figures for all of 1942. The submarines operating specifically in the Southwest Pacific, targeting Rabaul's supply lines, accounted for a substantial portion of these successes. The human toll was staggering. In 1943 alone, submarine attacks killed 9,177 Japanese soldiers aboard troop transports. Add to this the merchant seamen, the naval personnel aboard escort vessels, and the support staff aboard cargo ships. The waters between Truk and Rabaul, between Rabaul and New Guinea, between Rabaul and the Solomon Islands, became graveyards for thousands of men. 15 American submarines were lost in 1943. Each loss meant roughly 80 officers and men who would never return home. Triton, Argonaut, Amberjack, Growler, and others joined what submariners called the Eternal Patrol. Their sacrifice purchased strategic results that altered the course of the Pacific War. By early 1944, the transformation was complete. Rabaul, once the most powerful Japanese base in the South Pacific, had become an isolated outpost. Allied aircraft pounded the airfields daily. No Japanese heavy ships dared enter Simpson Harbor after carrier strikes in November 1943 damaged or sank numerous cruisers and destroyers, and the submarine blockade ensured that supply ships rarely reached the harbor at all. Japanese records from early 1944 show the desperate situation. Rations were reduced. Aviation fuel was rationed to emergency defensive operations only. Ammunition stocks declined. Medical supplies dwindled. The 110,000 troops at Rabaul were effectively marooned, cut off from reinforcement or resupply. They could defend the base but could not project power beyond it. The strategic concept of isolation by air and sea power, tested at Rabaul, became American doctrine for the remainder of the Pacific War. Rather than assault heavily fortified positions, bypass them. Cut their supply lines with submarines and aircraft. Let the garrisons wither while Allied forces advance toward Japan. The strategy saved countless Allied lives and accelerated the pace of advance across the Pacific. USS Gudgeon, one of the most successful submarines operating against Rabaul's supply lines, provides a window into the cumulative impact of submarine operations. On her fifth war patrol in October through December 1942, Gudgeon sank the Choco Maru, west-northwest of Rabaul. On subsequent patrols, she sank 14 confirmed ships totaling over 71,000 tons, placing her 15th on the honor roll of American submarines. Gudgeon departed for her 12th war patrol on April 4, 1944. She stopped for fuel at Johnston Island on April 7th and was never seen again. On June 7, 1944, Gudgeon was officially declared overdue and presumed lost with 79 officers and men. Post-war analysis suggests she was sunk southeast of Iwo Jima, possibly on April 18th, by a combined air and surface anti-submarine attack. The sea keeps its secrets. The stories of individual submarines illuminate the larger campaign. USS Gato, operating in the same waters, damaged numerous vessels and survived the war. USS Greenling pressed attacks despite torpedo failures and mechanical problems. USS Swordfish, USS Pollack, USS Tautog, each conducted multiple patrols, each contributed to the cumulative pressure on Japanese supply operations. The submariners who survived their patrols carried memories that time could not erase: the tension of approaching a convoy, the countdown before torpedo launch, the wait for impact, the roar of depth charges, the silence after action when men realized they had survived another attack. These experiences bonded submarine crews in ways that remained incomprehensible to those who had not served in the silent service. Post-war analysis by Japanese military historians confirmed what American submarine commanders had suspected. The loss of merchant shipping was a primary factor in Japan's defeat. Japanese industries required imported raw materials. Japanese forces overseas required constant resupply. The submarine campaign severed these vital connections. By 1944, Japanese merchant tonnage had declined to the point where sustaining military operations across the Pacific became impossible. The campaign's effectiveness improved dramatically as the war progressed. In 1942, American submarines sank approximately 725,000 tons of Japanese shipping. In 1943, that number doubled to 1.5 million tons. In 1944, it exploded to 2.7 million tons as torpedo problems were finally resolved and more submarines entered service. The peak year for submarine effectiveness coincided with Japan's most desperate need for maritime transport. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, Rabaul's garrison still numbered approximately 69,000 troops. They had been isolated and bypassed, rendered strategically irrelevant by the very campaign that submarines had begun in early 1943. The fortress that was supposed to anchor Japan's South Pacific defense had become a prison for its defenders. The lessons learned in the waters around Rabaul influenced naval strategy for decades. The effectiveness of coordinated submarine operations against merchant shipping was never forgotten. The importance of intelligence in directing submarine patrols became doctrine. The necessity of reliable weapons was purchased through the bitter experience of torpedo failures in 1942 and early 1943. Commander Howard Gilmore's final command, "Take her down," became symbolic of the submarine service's ethos. Mission accomplishment above personal survival. The boat comes first. Gilmore received the Medal of Honor, but he also received something more lasting. Every submariner who came after knew his story and understood what it meant to serve in the silent service. The submarine campaign around Rabaul was not the largest or most dramatic operation of the Pacific War. It lacked the visual spectacle of carrier battles or amphibious assaults, but it achieved strategic effects that shaped the entire course of the war. By strangling Rabaul's supply lines, American submarines rendered Japan's strongest South Pacific base untenable. By forcing Japan to divert resources to convoy protection, they reduced Japanese offensive capabilities. By sinking hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping, they accelerated Japan's industrial collapse. The silent war beneath the waves around Rabaul demonstrated that maritime supremacy extends below the surface. Control of the sea includes control of what moves upon it and beneath it. American submarines, operating independently but pursuing a coordinated strategic objective, proved that small numbers of highly effective platforms could achieve effects far beyond their size. 74 officers and men aboard USS Triton. 86 aboard USS Growler when she was lost in 1944. 79 aboard USS Gudgeon. These numbers seem modest compared to the thousands involved in surface battles, but their impact was profound, cumulative, and ultimately decisive in the campaign to isolate and neutralize Japan's fortress at Rabaul. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.